Rise, you're able to catch up on all of these events on the Rise website and also on their YouTube channel. So please head over to those and catch up on the rest of them if you've missed them. So when I met Purminder just a couple of months ago, virtually of course, I was inspired not only by her technical aptitude and experience as studio director for BBC Radio, which was for 25 years, but also for the recent change of path of her career to innovation at the edge of the BBC. But also I thoroughly enjoyed listening to her honest and open stories of all of her experiences. So I'm really, really delighted to have you here, Purminder, and welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
Great.
Sorry, my computer is doing some odd things, so if I look like I'm a bit confused, that's because I'm just trying to get back to the screen.
That's fine. And how are you keeping in these strange times?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole world's going through pretty much the same experience right now, you know, trying to readjust, to reevaluate, try and second guess what the future might hold. But on a personal level, I think I'd been in this role for about 5 weeks before the lockdown happened. So having to readjust to doing everything virtually. And sorry, messages popping up again. I was just hoping that my machine wasn't going to force restart there. Yeah, just having to reassess how I approach my new role. A lot of what my role is about being able to network with industry partners and with the varying different departments across the BBC. So kind of losing that ability to be able to do that in a face-to-face environment has been a challenge.
And make those new relationships as well. That's really important at the beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah, very strange for you. Absolutely. So you've had an incredible career run, and now and then with your recent move to the Edge. But I think it would be a really good idea to kick off about your previous role as senior studio director at the BBC, which you did for 25 years. So what did that actually involve?
So when I joined the BBC as a trainee, I actually joined as a studio manager, which was the basically the sound broadcast engineer role within radio. And when I joined, we were working with tape and razor blades and splicing tape. So, you know, to have gone through that whole sort of digital transformation. The studio director role evolved as a result of efficiencies and cost saving exercises through the BBC. And what we did was we merged a couple of roles. So we merged the studio producer's role with that of a technical person. So the studio director's responsibilities basically involve ensuring technical excellence of the programme, and that ranges from everything from monitoring the quality of incoming lines, facilitating that connectivity, dealing with the producers and the editors that are also in the studio with you, ensuring that presenters know exactly what's going on, ensuring that the programme runs to time, ensuring that on the Today programme, for example, your presenters don't crash the GTS at the top of the hour. So it's quite a broad skill set, but having had those many, many years of just working in a purely technical role closely with production and editorial teams meant that assimilation of those sort of slightly more production-based skills was quite easy. It was quite a groundbreaking thing for us to do at the BBC as a team. And it's not a role that I think really exists anywhere else in the industry. But it's great. The great thing about studio directing is that you work across the whole gamut of news programming. So that could be that one day you're on the Today programme and the following day you're working on something like News Hour on the World Service. You could be working on The World Tonight. You could be down at Millbank helping with parliamentary programmes. So basically just ensuring the technical production side of the programme goes really, really well, and supporting all of the production and editorial teams to realise their ambition for the programme.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I can imagine for someone like yourself who's quite a people person as well as being technical, that actually it's sort of an almost perfect role, or possibly is a perfect role actually. Yeah, sounds great. Sounds really nice.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be able to have those interpersonal skills alongside your technical skills. I think as women, you know, we are great communicators and we bring a different angle to the way we communicate as well. And being able to deal with all different kinds of personalities and different types of people when you're in that role, whether they are guests or members of your team. Because, you know, you are dealing with guests, whether that's remotely or physically welcoming them to the studio. So yeah, I think definitely having that strong communication skill as well as that, you know, high level of technical ability definitely makes for a successful kind of skill set for being in that role.
That's brilliant. And you've done a lot of world events. What has been the highlights of your career?
So yeah, I mean, it's kind of, when you reflect on it, which I've been doing as in preparation for this conversation, you kind of realize that you've been there at all of these really significant points in sort of world history. So whether that's, you know, the release of Nelson Mandela, not physically in South Africa, but just even just being in the studios in London and facilitating all of that programming requirement. But I guess sort of personal highlights for me on locations. I did an extensive amount of location work as well, working in teams and both on my own. But yeah, really lucky to do things like Radio 1 in Ibiza, the Olympics in Athens, Africa Cup of Nations more recently in 2017, which was in Gabon. And then I guess, you know, one of my most sort of big moments would have been when Her Majesty the Queen came to open Broadcasting House, and I was asked to studio direct the live programme where she came to do that formal opening of the programme. So yeah, it's been a very wide variety of different challenges technically and in terms of sort of communication skills. But yeah, just you know, I need to write a book, don't I?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's some of my stories. Yeah. That'll be my retirement plan.
And having the Queen there must have been, you know, the security must have been immense. Actually.
Yeah, that was very interesting. So the day before, the morning of, in fact, the whole sort of studio complex was swept by sniffer dogs and, you know, bomb squads, security, etc., etc. It was supposed to be very limited as to who had access to the studio suite at the time of it, but as you can imagine, it did cause quite a kerfuffle amongst the staff throughout the building, and everybody was keen to kind of see Her Majesty in person. So there was a point at which a lot of people had come into the control room, or the cubicle as we refer to it in the BBC, little bit of BBC vernacular, and there were just suddenly, you know, 20 or 30 people standing either behind the window at the back of the studio or just had like muscled their way in because they just, you know, wanted to have a little peek and see what Her Majesty was like up close and personal. So yeah, I did have to kind of assert my authority and ask those that weren't actually associated with the official royal party to leave the studio, because, you know, at the end of the day, we were probably facilitating one of the most important broadcasts of our careers, those of us that were actually working that day. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit disconcerting to sort of have to keep battling through while you've got all of this sort of, you know, sensational chaos going on behind you.
That's brilliant. And tech-wise, you mentioned earlier about when you arrived, you were splicing tapes. What's the biggest change that you've seen tech-wise in the industry?
Oh, well, I guess I'd have to say the sort of digital revolution has made a massive industry-wide change to the way that we work. Obviously, what you can do digitally now is much quicker and much more accessible for lots of different kinds of people. You know, modifications that can be made to editing software, for example, to help people with accessibility needs and that sort of thing. But in terms of, for me personally, I think, you know, the whole sort of digital revolution meant that the size of kit came down. So being able to sort of, you know, be quite agile and react to stuff and be able to do that with a small backpack of stuff rather than having to deploy huge OB trucks or, you know, a massive team of people to facilitate something that was actually quite straightforward. And, you know, just that whole sort of portability ethic of it. So being able to respond quickly, you know, not having to haul quite so much heavy kit around, not getting to a location and finding that you didn't have that one vital cable in order to make your kit work, you know, being able to make those workarounds happen and just be able to control everything from your Mac, for example. When it comes to connectivity, being able to work over 4G and the Ethernet without having to worry about, do I have a view of a satellite? I mean, when I started, you know, the guys that used to do a lot of the location work would have to physically plot where the satellite was in order to see whether they would have a line of sight in order to be able to be connected. So, you know, it's a massive difference now where I can just take my iPhone, you know, use my satellite locator app, point it at the sky and know straight away whether I'm going to be able to make that job work or not. Has just made things infinitely easier. But then obviously, you know, sometimes the tech does let you down, and having that grounding in the non-digital age means that hopefully it helps you to resolve any issues that might have arisen, just because you've got that kind of grounding in understanding of really, you know, what is the basic of how I make this connection work.
Yeah, okay, fascinating. And yeah, I mean, that the size of the kit is really interesting, isn't it? And has that made your job easier, or has your job got bigger, like in a lot of cases where actually you're expected to do much more in the time?
I mean, I think, you know, a lot of the challenges that are going on in many sort of parts of the industry right now, it is about sort of, you know, being efficient in terms of finance. And I think that, you know, the digital revolution has enabled that somewhat. Whether it's made my job easier or not, I guess the things that I just discussed have made it easier, but then the things that have made it more tricky is like having to learn lots of new stuff. The way that my brain works is that I'm not just happy to know what I need to do to make something work. I need to know why that makes it work, because then when it's maybe giving me problems, I can then troubleshoot that. So yeah, sort of, I think the biggest takeaway for me with regards to all of that is about understanding that, you know, once you're in a profession, even if you've been somewhere for 10 years, which is apparently the point at which you're considered an expert in your field, it's still a learning process. It's still a journey where you have to engage your brain and you have to be thirsty, hungry for that information in order to be able to be the best that you can be in the role that you're performing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And how, so what are the biggest challenges, not tech-wise, that you've had in your career as well, and how have you overcome those?
I think in terms of challenges, I think, you know, and I'm sure a lot of the people on this webinar who are in sort of tech roles will understand the demands that shift work puts on you, sort of personally, physically, you know, the inability to spend time with your family when you want to, because radio happens 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So, you know, missing out on Christmases and birthdays, not being able to attend weddings, or, you know, just go down the pub with your mates on a Friday night because you've got to get up at 4 a.m. So, you know, navigating that and understanding that that's a choice that you've made because you're passionate about your career and you really, really want to, you know, be involved in what you're doing. In terms of sort of professional challenges, I think I've been quite lucky in terms of being a woman. I never really felt that being a woman was a barrier to me being successful within the technical field that I was in. When I joined as a junior trainee, there were lots of very strong women in the team. The studio manager or studio director teams have always kind of historically has attracted people from very different sort of disciplines and backgrounds. So, you know, there are people that have been to the Royal Academy of Music. There are people with amazing degrees in history and geography and music and whatever, English literature, whatever it might be. So, you know, as a group of people, very, very open-minded. I guess probably one of the only sort of real slightly sexist incidents that I can recall was probably, I think it was 2003, when there was a memorial service for the bombing that happened in Bali, the terrorist attacks, and we were off rigging at St Paul's Cathedral. And in order to rig into St Paul's at that time, they're basically tunnels that run under the road. So the truck was parked on the pavement, and you had to physically pull cables through these horrible sort of sewer-like tunnels, I guess, that are reportedly infested with London rats and whatnot. So I was there, you know, working with my colleague, pulling these cables through, and there was a guy from another broadcaster, and he just kept saying to me, "I can't believe you're a woman and you're doing this job." And I was really surprised by that, because my experience was that there were all these amazing women that were doing work. I'm not saying that the representation is anywhere near 50-50, but, you know, there was some significantly strong, well-experienced, well-respected women within the BBC. I was kind of like, you know what? There's a lot of women on my team, so I'm really surprised. But I guess it's just kind of curiosity, isn't it?
And different culture, and
perhaps
maybe
perhaps. I mean, I've never been frightened to get on the floor and, you know, find my cable and figure out what's going on. You know, it's not always a glamorous job working in broadcasting. You know, sometimes you have to get a bit dirty, and you never have nails because you're always sort of, you know, rigging and doing horrible things. And
but that's what's nice about getting dirty, isn't it? And getting stuck into your job. I think that's, you know,
I think that's that's definitely one of the highlights of the role, is that, you know, you can spend a day sitting in a beautifully air-conditioned studio, putting out a program, doing a beautiful balance, dealing with everything that comes on, but then, you know, to get out in the field. And also, you know, when you're out in the field like that, with the organization, the audience feels like they have that sort of familiarity with you. So, you know, they want to come and talk, "Oh, what are you doing? What's happening? Why are you here? What's the story?" And so sort of balancing that, "Oh my gosh, I've got a deadline, you know, I've got a 1800 live top for the news to do." And, you know, you have to remember that you're representing the BBC, but that you're also trying to, you know, make sure that you've got your job ready and set to go.
Yeah, amazing. So you've done a lot of work with diversity and inclusion. Could you tell us a bit more about that, and how you've seen attitudes and policies change over the years?
So I myself joined the BBC through an equal opportunity scheme in the early 90s. And the scheme was called, it had a very bizarre title, it was like Technical Operations for Black, Asian and Chinese Ethnic Minorities in Technical Operations. Bit of a mouthful. I'm happy that these days we've kind of got the language a little bit more simplified. So yeah, coming in via that route has made me kind of obviously really feel very strongly and passionately about representation within the industry. A couple of years ago, my manager had a conversation with me where he was like, you know, we're really keen to sort of try and up the profile of D&I within our team. So I was leading on D&I within Output Operations Audio team. So some of the things that I worked on were recruitment. So when it came to recruitment, I'd done a bit of research about language in job descriptions and how certain language can either encourage or exclude women in particular. So it was just kind of being aware of that sort of thing, reading through the job description, because, you know, we were very conscious that, you know, we knew that there are plenty of women out there studying in these fields or operationally working in local radio, community radio, whatever it might be. So we knew that there were women out there with the skill set, but we couldn't really understand why they weren't coming when these applications were going out. So it was just sort of tweaking the language. So where there was a sentence that may have sort of said something along the lines of, "Oh, you know, you will be expected to do X, Y, and Z by the end of this amount of time," I thought it was important to make sure that the language mentioned things to do with training, mentoring, and support. because that kind of positive language I hoped would encourage a sort of increase in application from women. And also just sort of being physically present on interview panels as well. I think, you know, for anybody who comes from a BAME background, as well as being female, to sort of see that representation in an interview panel is really, really important. And then some of the other stuff that I was involved in, my old department used to run a really great scheme called an Introduction to Radio Operations, which where for a week, 5 days, we would select, I think it was like 10 people each course, and we ran 2 courses a year. So I was involved in that for about 3 years. And we would get submissions from, you know, people that the advert would go out on the BBC website. So all you had to really demonstrate was some sort of affinity with broadcasting. So again, you know, you were either working in community radio or hospital radio, whatever it might be. And you got the opportunity to come and train at the BBC's dedicated training centre up in Evesham at BBC Wood Norton. So you got it was a 5-day residential course. You got, you know, bespoke training about how we do the job, particularly in the BBC, as well as some sort of theoretical background stuff, you know, compression, limiters, whatever, connectivity, 4G, satellites. And I think it was a really, really fantastic outreach program and really, really rewarding. So being able to engage with people that maybe felt underserved by the BBC, or felt that the BBC wasn't an attainable goal for them. I remember one of the sessions, the feedback we had at the end of the week, somebody said, "But you're all so nice. We never expected you to be so nice."
Oh, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant.
Which is lovely, but it does kind of make you think, oh, you know, where does that perception come from? So, you know, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that we've done here, and sort of, you know, helping people to overcome other challenges. Maybe they came back from a socially disadvantaged background, and, you know, there was one member of one of the courses who had never left home before, let alone stayed in a hotel. So even just that experience, to be able to broaden somebody's horizon and also encourage them to create their network and continue to stay connected beyond the course and support each other, and, you know, navigate their way into their professional career choices as they went along.
Yeah, it's so important, that piece, isn't it? Being able to diversify the people coming in, and you know, making sure that you're talking to as diverse range of people as possible. Yeah,
I'm a really strong believer in paying it forward as well, which was an expression I hadn't really heard in the context of sort of leadership and professionalism before. But when I went on some leadership training, it was a phrase that was used a lot, and it was kind of like, okay, you know, this really makes sense. I think as women, you know, we really need to sort of support each other and ensure that we enable each other to be successful and provide whatever guidance and experience and support that you can. You know, everybody's got time for a cup of tea. That's really, really an important message as well. So I think, you know, if you are out there and you're thinking, oh wow, you know, I think this person that works in my company, but I don't want to bother them, they're so busy, and I you know, on the other hand, I'd really love to get some of their insight. Don't be afraid, just ping them an email, and I guarantee you, based on my experience, you know, I was so warmed by how positively my requests to speak to people were received. I don't think anybody ever refused to take 5 or 10 minutes out of their busy schedule, as long as you kind of are very clear about what it is you'd like to talk to them about, and, you know, how you think they might be able to help you. I think, people are more than willing to be supportive and help, and I definitely want to carry that with me. And it's one of the reasons why I you know, accepted your invitation to speak with you today, because anything that I might say, even if it's like the tiniest nugget that can kind of inspire or make someone believe that, that, you know, they've made the right choice and they're channeling their energies in the right direction, and, you know, that they're going to achieve what they want to achieve. I think it's really important to be very clear about what your intention is with your career and set that intention. So start with your outcome and then kind of work backwards. So this is where I want to be. What are the things that I need to do, and who are the people that I should talk to, and just, you know, build that network of people, and just, you know, being the person that is friendly and helpful in the workplace makes you remembered. So people are more likely to recall you if you've bailed them out of a tricky technical situation. You know, you've got a reporter that can't make their kit work or whatever, and you manage to resolve that issue for you. And also when you work on location, the sort of dynamic is very, very intertwined, because you're doing those really, really long hours, you're traveling together, you're sort of, you know, fighting all of the challenges together. So you kind of have that sort of being on tour mentality with those team members that you work with as well. And I think that really helps to cement those positive working relationships as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's incredible insight, actually. Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that. So when we spoke the other day, we talked about your leadership program, the Women in Technical Production program for BBC Radio, BBC News. That's
BBC
right.
News, yeah.
And also, you talked a lot about your many career champions that made a huge difference in your life, and I found that really fascinating. Because as you said just then, you know, you're really not afraid to talk and reach out to people, which is obviously a lovely quality that you have, and it served you really well. So could you tell us a little bit more about what you learned from the schemes, and also what you learned from who your biggest influences are, and what you've learned from them?
So I guess it kind of all sort of filters into, I'd got to that point where I had this little niggle in the back of my mind that, you know, maybe I wanted to try something a little bit different with my career direction. And I was on secondment to the location team, and we shared a building with location facilities for news gathering. And Sarah Shepherd was the manager of the location facilities team. And at that point, she was about to make her move into mobile journalism in innovation. And one of my colleagues jokingly said to me, "Oh, Sarah's leaving. Yeah, you should apply for her job." And I was like, "Really? Yeah, I think you'd be really good." So I think I kind of had a bit of an effort moment. I was like, okay. So I approached Sarah, who I didn't really know at that point. And she was just so generous with her time. She took like an hour out of her time to sit and talk to me about the role and, you know, what the kind of requirements were and how to approach. And at that point, I'd never really applied for a more senior role, managerial role. So it was a complete new experience. And as I say, she was amazingly supportive, and just, it really showed me that, you know, this is how a good manager behaves. You know, somebody who's willing to engage with you, even if they don't really have a responsibility for you. And some of the advice that she gave was, she'd been on, so the BBC News Women in Technical Production programme had run, so it's biannually, I believe, and she'd done the first one. So the advice she gave me was, try and get yourself on this programme, because it really helped me, and I think, you know, you could benefit. So when it came around again, I did apply, and was very honoured to be selected to be part of that group. And I guess what that scheme provided me was the sort of the language and the understanding that I did not have up until that point. So just that kind of awareness of what being a leader means, how you navigate that journey to getting into the role that you want to get into, how do you identify the things that you need to be proficient at in order to be able to be successful once you get that role, and how you continue to progress within that role. And so Katie Lloyd and Sarah Lamley, who are, you know, the development director and responsible for that particular scheme, you know, it's just a brilliant scheme. And I think overall what it did sort of signal as well was this kind of shift change within the organisation, because I think prior to that there'd never really been any recognition of the fact that, you know, women that were maybe working as camera operators or sound engineers or, you know, satellite coordinators had not had that kind of opportunity to show their skills and their abilities and their talents, so that they could be moved into those areas. And I think as the tech industry is exploding and all of these new roles are being created pretty much, you know, every week there's a new area of specialism. And I think that, you know, there are loads of women out there that have got those skills that just need those opportunities. So within the scheme, you know, we had the benefit of like loads of brilliant women coming to talk to us. Sarah Shepherd came and spoke to us about her experience on the scheme the year before and how it had benefited her. Morrowind Williams, who you've had on before, and I have to say that, you know, Morrowind's definitely been a real inspiration for me as well. She was recently appointed the head of UK output operations, and she was a guest with you a few weeks ago. And again, you know, just somebody who was really approachable, was really easy to talk to, didn't use lots of complicated language, was very approachable, very supportive and encouraging. And I think if I sort of go back sort of right to the very, very early years of my career, there was when I was in the late 80s, I scored a little summer job working in a post-production in a production company in Soho. So back in the days when runners used to run canisters of film through the streets of Soho to production houses and things like that. And the company was owned by a woman called Gillo Waddington. And I guess that was where I kind of got my media bug. We were mostly producing corporate films and commercials, so things like Pampers nappies, Marmite, rally bikes, De Beers diamonds. We even had the contract for Eurostar before it had even been built, and I remember being in the studio and us having to like mock up what the inside of the train was potentially going to look like for one of the shoots. So yeah, I think my experience has been I'm my scattered thought process, excuse me. Going back to the Women in Tech scheme, we had loads of brilliant female speakers that came to speak to us. So it was people like Jacqueline de Rojas from Tech UK, Vanessa Valley from We Are the City, Francesco Gina from Harvard Business School. And a lot of the concepts that were being discussed through all of these sessions were sort of like how to change the perception of what leadership is. So Francesco Gino, for example, wrote a book called Rebel Talent, which is
great,
this one here. not product placement, but a good read, particularly for someone like me who was always a little bit different in terms of personality, you know, not afraid to say what I think, likes to laugh.
What do you mean
very
different?
loud.
You think your different perceptions of what leadership is, or?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that what people expect from a leader now is very, very different to 20 years ago. So I think for me, it was just a matter of like time that it kind of caught up with my personality.
That's really interesting, isn't it? And I remember something you mentioned before, actually, which was that you're quite struck by the fact that you had natural leadership skills and you didn't realise, which was it was about integrity, honesty, openness, and those sorts of things, which I think is great. I think it's, I think that's a really interesting.
You know, sometimes it's really difficult, isn't it? You can you think you know yourself, you know. I mean, I'm not a youngster anymore, young at heart perhaps, but and you get to a point where you're in your 20s and you think, yeah, life, I've got this, you know, I know what this is all about. But the way I think now is very, very different. And the things that I didn't see in myself in my 20s, I kind of have, they just sit more comfortably now. Things that things about my personality that people maybe found to be a little bit abrupt, I've kind of found that particularly within the tech world, you know, that kind of being able to be succinct and to the point, which is really, really necessary in sort of live environments and things like that, actually works quite well. But you know, it's a fine balance. And I think, you know, disruptive leadership is basically the theme of the Rebel Talent book. And when you say disruptive leadership, you know, it kind of throws up lots of different scenarios. But I guess my understanding of it is just kind of, you know, not being afraid of kind of approaching something from the opposite side.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. And that's come up quite a lot in a lot of our webinars, actually.
Right.
A lot of people have mention that a lot. I think it's been a common theme of being
And I
not
think as
afraid
women,
to talk out and to speak
yeah,
up,
and I
to
think
ask
as women
questions.
generally, particularly in the tech field, I mean, I know as a very junior techie, there wasn't the internet. And what it felt like was there were lots of men in senior roles that had carved a sort of specialism within the role. And sometimes it was really difficult to kind of extract that information, no matter how hungry to learn you were. And I think that, you know, that's the brilliant thing about the internet. You know, so if you are that person who finds it difficult to ask questions, just write it down and then go away and Google it and inform yourself, because nobody is the protector of information anymore. Like, no one is the gatekeeper of information anymore. You know, you can learn as much as you're prepared to learn, but the journey is not easy either. You know, it is hard. And I being in a new role right now, there are quite often I have a notebook, and when somebody says something, because acronyms are very popular, and I might not know what they mean, and it's like, okay, I'll just Google it afterwards and figure it out, and, you know, contextualize it.
So that actually brings us to asking you about your new role, and what was the catalyst for change?
So, I mean, I think it was a number of things. I think, you know, 25 years in a job is, you know, a massive amount of time. I think there's probably very few people sort of moving forward that will be able to say that they've done the same role for that amount of time. And I think that the tech industry and broadcasting industry is evolving so quickly, and, you know, 5G is on the horizon, and that's going to make a massive impact on the way we work. And as has, you know, the whole experience of everybody working remotely right now is definitely sort of feeding into all of those things in the future. So for me personally, I was ready for a new challenge. I kind of had this conversation with Katie Lloyd, the development director. I was like, oh, you know, nearly 50, like, done this job for 25 years, and really, like, she said, Purminder, we're all going to be working till we're 70. Like, you've still got plenty of really great working years in you. Like, don't give up yet. So I was kind of like, oh, okay. And because I'm a people person, you know, I wanted to be in a role where I was able to sort of, you know, use that skill set and the background that I had in technology to be able to move forward. And this job came to me. It was kind of like I set my intention about what I wanted. So through the Women in Tech program, as I was saying, we were exposed to lots of different people, and we had people from design and engineering and research and development come and talk to us. And just from listening to the way that these people talked and interacted, I was kind of like, oh, I'm getting a good feeling about this kind of environment. I think this is where I'd like to be. Or in fact, I know this is where I'd like to be. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, shift work is really, really demanding. It's incredibly demanding. I mean, I'm really fortunate. I don't have children. I'm not married. So I'm not juggling all those things, where a lot of the women that I work with are juggling all of that. And, you know, tip my hat to all of those women that manage to juggle family life as well as holding down, you know, a really demanding career. So, you know, go on, my sisters out there. Yeah, I just wanted to be able to sort of do something that was exciting, and sort of being on this sort of front edge of what's happening in terms of innovation and technological advancement. It's not somewhere where I imagined myself to be, but the advert was actually sent to me by a colleague. And in classic sort of, you know, female way, I sort of initially read the job description and I thought, I don't know if I can do this. But then, no, I remembered all of the training that I'd had and all of the stuff that I'd been told. And I thought, okay, I'm going to reach out to the poster. Spoke to Ian, and he just seemed really encouraging and didn't seem to think that I was punching above my weight with regards to this role. So I submitted my application and off I went, and it was quite a challenging selection process. I think my first interview was over Zoom, which now seems normal, but sort of, you know, the end of last year, that was kind of like a new experience for me as well. And in the second interview, I had to do a presentation to another interview panel. which was again something that was really out of my comfort zone. But again, you know, feel the fear and do it anyway. One of the little mantras that we were taught. I think nothing worth really having comes easy.
Yeah,
I think some people may disagree with that, and I think that I really wanted to just prove to myself that I wasn't, you know, past it. Like I still had some mileage, I still had loads more to give, and I had loads more to learn, and hopefully, you know, I will be successful in this role. It's going okay so far.
I'm sure you will, and you've got so much technical, you know, experience, and yeah, you know, and not just technical experience, but as you say, you know, sort of navigating yourself around, you know, the presenters, the people, managing all sorts of things. I'm sure, and actually, I'm not sure if we even mentioned what the Edge actually does.
Okay, so the easiest way to explain the Edge, so I'm the lead of the Edge. So the Edge is kind of this sort of thing that's not really there, but it is. What we do is we pull in loads of engineers, architectural, operational expertise, and we have a forum for an exchange of ideas, trialing of new technology, influencing workflows, primarily in the areas of contribution and connectivity. So currently we're looking at things like, you know, when ISDN goes away, how do we replace all of the BBC's connectivity in the future? We're looking forward to complete sort of end-to-end IP. Obviously satellite is very, very expensive, so anything that we can do over IP again makes us more you know, affordable in the way that we move forward, because money is always a concern for the BBC. And also, you know, we've got a massive expansion in the kind of services that we provide, so sort of trying to make a pot feed 7 people gets trickier and trickier as time goes on. So yeah, I work with people from the nations in the region, so everyone from BBC Scotland to Northern Ireland, Wales, English regions, as well as network radio. We look after we have input from people in radio and education, sport, so pretty much every field where there's an element of live or remote production going on. They engage with the group, and we also engage with industry-wide, wider industry, so, you know, other companies that may be of benefit to the organisation in terms of the kind of kit that they can provide us with, or solutions to sort of connection for the future. Yeah. So it's a lot of coordination, it's a lot of meetings,
yeah.
a lot of talking to
a lot of new technology, which is fascinating actually.
Yeah, and also for me, coming from a radio background, obviously I'm not just focused on audio stuff. I'm sort of, you know, working on projects to do with TV, so whether that's UHD or 8K or whatever that might be. So sort of, as I was saying, the learning journey is not ending, so I'm having to learn, you know, the specs involved, I'm having to learn the vernacular used within the industry, I'm having to make a few more connections within my network within that side of the industry as well.
Amazing. We've actually got a question from Tanya.
Okay, awesome.
Tanya Ray, thank you for sending that in. So I'll put it in now, and then if we've got time, we'll carry on a couple of other questions. Sure. So a really good question. Would you encourage younger people in the profession to learn the old analog ways to understand the tech they're using now?
Okay, so I think the theory of tech and how we do things now is all based in the old analog world in terms of workflows and stuff. And I think what we need to do is update all of that. I think if you're kind of curious, it might be advantageous, but I think that anybody who's sort of approaching the industry from a starting point now, probably not that relevant, not unless you're maybe into sort of, you know, sound design or something, and you want to try and recreate those old analog effects that you would get. But I can't think of a real sort of massive reason for that. I mean, signal processing and all of that kind of thing, that really hasn't changed as we speak. I mean, there might be just elements of processing paths and stuff that feel different, but
Yeah, and I guess things are changing so quickly as well, aren't they, with new technologies such as
Yeah,
5G, for example.
yeah,
You know, the brand new
yeah.
technologies that it's probably worth looking at those actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think be prepared for what's coming. I think that's really, really important. I think if you're just starting out in a technical career, you know, understand what's on the horizon as well, because then that will inform your choices about, well, where do I need to place myself in order to be prepared for that change when it happens?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
will I have that right kind of skill set? Will I understand the vernacular that's being used? And
Yeah.
if new roles are being created as a result of that new technology, you know, is there, you know, can I spot something where my skill set fits that maybe no one else is really thinking about right now? I think the opportunities now, particularly for sort of flexible working and things like that in the tech world, are much better. You know,
Yeah.
because you don't physically have to be in a production house or physically in a studio to make things happen anymore.
I know I'm going to pitch in here because I think this is it's a really interesting question actually, and I think technically as well, and I know we talked a bit about this, Purminder, as well, about if you're interested in something, then I think it's really worth delving into that. Even if your paths change, then you can always you will always find a use of those things that you found out and you learned and you looked in depth for. And actually, I think as the world goes along, the more that you can bring all these different experiences and technologies together, actually, the better, really.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps. I think, as I was saying as well, I think we kind of agree, don't we? It's about curiosity, isn't it?
Yeah,
And I think that if you're passionate about something, I think naturally you'll want to understand why are we at this position now? Like what was going on in the past to bring us to this point, and that may inform how we move in the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't talked about the COVID situation much, and I'm just quite interested in and how that's affected the way that you work with innovation. Just briefly about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's really, really difficult because when you're working in technology, you want to be able to get your hands on kit, don't you? And you want to be able to play with it and break it or make it do things or test it to its limits. And the problem is with the current situation is that physically we can't gather. So that's kind of interrupting how quickly we're able to progress with some of the projects that are in the pipeline at the moment, which is a little bit frustrating. I think for me personally, I've kind of acclimatized to this method of working from my front room with the curtains drawn and a note on the door saying "Do not disturb."
Yeah.
But,
And in terms of the edge, have you seen an increase in them looking at remote working?
Yeah, I think that's really quite a high sort of theme at the moment. Is the remote production conversations were definitely, you know, quite well advanced already before this happened, and I think the lockdown has kind of pushed that program a little bit. So I think the desire for those solutions is becoming more urgent. I mean, I know in-house, you know, we've got people that are trying to develop short-term solutions to problems of contribution and connectivity across the BBC, but there are also, you know, external products available that are doing things. And I think right about now, it's also kind of highlighted the need. I mean, you know, the world is definitely going to be different after this. And I think if we are in a situation where we have the ability to do a high value content in a way that's safe for everybody that's involved in that, and there's still high production value and quality in what we're doing, you know, one of the questions that I asked quite early on when a lot of the coverage was being done in the way that we're doing this webinar, for example, you know, will people become more tolerant of lower quality contributions? Mm-hmm. Or will it be the opposite, that people will think, oh, it's such a relief to kind of, you know, see somebody juttering and freezing and audio dipping in and out. So yeah, I mean, that seems to be the sort of strongest theme from my perspective right now, is just kind of
and what way do you think that will go? Do you think that will, in your opinion, do you think that people are desperate to see really good quality? Or
do you know what? I think what's interesting is I think it will be really determined by what age group is watching.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sort of, older generations like myself will probably be like, oh, it's such a relief to see something in high quality. What I would be interested to learn is whether the younger generation, who are much more used to doing everything on their phones or devices, and because they've grown up with it, they haven't had to adapt to the technology. I would be very interested to know what their interpretation of it might be. I don't know if there's anybody on the webinar who falls into that category that can answer that question for me. So yeah, and I think, certainly within the BBC, what we're trying to do is aim towards providing content that is more personalised, being able to cater content to people's personal desires. And I think if we can do that at high quality, people, when they see the difference, people will choose the higher quality stuff over the kind of level of web-based stuff that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's fascinating, and we'll find out, I guess.
Time will tell.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Purminder. It's been absolutely amazing to have you, and thank you for sharing your insights. And I do think that you should write a book about your experiences at some point. There you go.
When I can get to a beach somewhere and do it, then perhaps.
And what 2 nuggets of advice have you got for anyone wishing to change their path or push themselves forward in their career?
So what I would suggest is, as I said earlier, really be very, very clear about what your intention is, about where you want to be. Don't just kind of say, oh, I just want a new job, I just want to do something different. Do your research, work on building your network and make those connections with those people that you think might be able to give you the benefit of their experience. Book in for that cup of tea or whatever. And if you can get yourself a mentor as well, like for me, having a mentor and then also being able to be a mentor to somebody as well has been massively beneficial. Absolutely. And I think the other thing is just, don't be afraid. Like, feel the fear, but then just do it. Because what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that you might be unsuccessful, but ultimately every time you try, it gives you a little bit more experience and it prepares you for the next opportunity. And don't get me wrong, I didn't just go, oh, I want a new job, and jumped into this new job. I did lots of interviews and lots of research and lots of prep, and it wasn't easy. But because I'd made it really clear in my intention about what it was I wanted to do and how I wanted to feel, because your career takes up so much of your life that if you don't feel energized about getting up in the morning and going in to do that, then there's no point. Don't do it for the glory or for the glamour, because there are little nuggets of glamour, but generally it's not a glamorous job. You're just the sparky behind the scenes. But yeah, just be really clear about what you want. Seek your counsel. So your network doesn't just need to be a professional network, understand that you have that other network, which is like, your family, your best mate, your friends, other people. And I think another thing that I've really noticed that's happening in the BBC, which is amazing, is there are loads of women's networks that are being established. So my old team, they've set up a Women in Broadcast Operations network. There's like Women in Media, there's Rise. So, find those networks, find your home, and however you identify yourself, whatever your diversity or background might be, I can guarantee you there will be a network somewhere that you kind of feel comfortable in, and that helps you and works for you.
That's fantastic. And we just got a message from Louise Smith, who says, fabulous and inspiring.
Oh, thank you, Louise.
There we go. Well, thank you so much, Purminder. It's been
My pleasure.
really lovely chatting to you, and amazing to get to know you as well.
Likewise.
Great, thank you. And yeah, well, thank you, everybody. And this will be posted on the Rise website and also at YouTube. So do share it. Share all these gems of experience and in career gems. Please do. Well, thank you very much.